All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Better Body Radio. And today we are joined by Paul Standell, who I think should be called Paul Standup Comedy, as he's equal parts the comedian as he is an incredibly intelligent coach. Now, Paul runs his online coaching business, Body by Control, which helps clients ranging from beginner fat loss all the way through to photoshoot and physique competition conditions. I met Paul virtually when I started out studying resistance training specialist, so RTS material, alongside a group kind of coaching model via Integra Education ran by Michael Goulden in London. It turns out Paul is working through the material a second time to further his understanding and to fill in some more of the gaps that we all inevitably have when we kind of start learning knowledge for the first time. And he's really kind of just going through there, filling the gaps. And as I got more familiar with him as an individual over the weeks, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that he would go about doing this, because, you know, just with his inquisitive and exploring type of mind, a critical thinking mind. So Paul is starting to build a little bit of a reputation for his way of communicating and teaching the mathematical elements of physics as it applies to exercise mechanics. But he has quite the broad knowledge base and skill set as a coach, and that opens up for a podcast interview, which has quite a range of topics, which I really wanted to touch on, because I think Paul's been getting asked a lot about his exercise mechanics knowledge recently, but I feel like he's got a lot more insight to offer in other areas. So this episode is going to be equal parts educational and entertaining. So grab a coffee or your favorite beverage, or enjoy the listen on your daily commute. All right, Paul, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, buddy. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, so we'll just literally dive in straight at the top, shall we? So for those that are not familiar with you and your work, can you just brief the listener on a little bit of your backstory and what made you get into the fitness industry?
Yeah, so I guess my backstory is kind of similar to quite a few people's, in that through my formative teenage years, I had terrible acne and no females really wanted to be all that close to me. And that for me was a good enough reason to be like, well, if I can't do anything about my skin, I could at least not look like a bit of a potato that I'd kind of turned into after school had kind of finished. You're eating a bit too much, you're drinking a bit too much, but you stop playing sport and things. And you're like, okay, an acne-ridden, slightly chunky boy isn't going so well. So that really spurred me into starting the gym, changing the way that looked. That actually did help with the female situation a little bit. And then kind of one thing leads to another after that. And yeah, I've been a PT now for, this is my, I think, 11th year. It's something kind of like that. I've been online for about 2015, something like that when I first started. I think that's pre-Instagram was when I first started kind of running some online things. And then in the last few years, yeah, really gotten down the mechanics side of things, which I'm sure we'll come on to a little later as we go. Little history of competing. So I've done natural bodybuilding shows and photoshoot preps, and I kind of enjoy that side of things. And I also have a personal history with OCD, was a thing I psychologically struggled with for a little bit of time back there. And I would say arguably learned more about the coaching process from the way you engage and get better from a psychologically difficult position than probably almost any other part of the coaching scheme. So that's me in some kind of weird esoteric spider web shell of things.
Very nice. It's funny. I think we've actually been in the industry for quite a similar length of time. I think I got into it in, dare I say, 2012, 2011.
Yeah. I think I started in 2011 was me.
So there you go.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And it's one thing I found really interesting. I think this is something you mentioned on the Muscle Mentors podcast you were on recently, was that you didn't really discover the exercise mechanics side of things until much, much, much later. And I kind of resonated with that, because I kind of came across it maybe 3 years back, and certainly started taking a bit of an interest in it, but never going and actually doing any of the courses or the formal learning. And to be honest, it was hard at the time, because being in Dubai, like, you're kind of hidden away from everything and the access to really smart minds like Michael, who's obviously been running this stuff for a long time with Integra. And of course, if you ever wanted to do anything in the US, well, it's a hell of a long trip to go from Dubai. So.
Yeah, so that's a long way.
But
it's kind of crazy how long you can stay in an industry, and I'm sure much like yourself, you know, spend time and effort trying to be better, and, you know, subscribing to Alan Aragon's research review and going to Eric Helms' seminars and reading Lyle McDonald and spending time on T Nation or reading Poliquin or whatever the kind of thing was. It kind of blows my mind that it took either of us as long as it did to really come across these mechanics questions, because really they are the foundation of what we're dealing with when we're exercising in any way. So it's an upsetting sign of how things were that it took that long. Although at the same time, I think I'm quietly optimistic that it does seem to be improving.
I do think it's gaining traction. Popularity wise, it seems to be, and I think there's certain personalities that have definitely helped that. Initially, I guess Ben Pekulski was one of the initial guys who was kind of starting to put that information out there, whether we all agree exactly with everything he teaches or not, which I think he's probably, but at least he was brave enough to say, right, well, I've learned from this guy. This guy isn't really interested in going mainstream, and let's be honest, Tom probably is never interested in going mainstream. So he's been quite happy to take that and make it popular, because being an IFBB pro, he's of course going to have a bit more sway in that world than someone who's just like, hey, I'm a really smart trainer, but I've not really done anything in IFBB or bodybuilding. So
well, I mean, even when, you know, we're starting out ourselves, if you think back to when you were a late teen, early 20s guy, you know, where were you trying to find your information? You were looking at the Jack dude on the cover of Men's Health, or like who was selling this supplement bottle or whatever it kind of was. It's like we're initially drawn to that aesthetic for a whole bunch of reasons. And I don't know if we're ever going to completely get away from that. Like, yes, maybe it would be better if we were drawn towards the really intelligent types initially, but you sort of, if you're in an industry within something that you don't know what you don't know, well, you don't know how to differentiate who's talking sense from who's talking bollocks. Like, if a mechanic comes to me and tells me that there's something wrong with my car, he could literally make up parts on my car, and I'd probably nod and be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know enough to differentiate between those things. And so we've got that intractable problem in so many domains that we use like proxies. And so if we want to know how to be in shape when we're younger, it's like, well, who's in shape already? That guy's the most in shape. Let's listen to him. And I don't know how you get around that, really. I don't know if that's a solvable problem or not, but it's just the way that is.
Yeah, it's the old adage of Wells. You could have the most intellectual argument with someone, and they're just like, well, shut up, I'm bigger than you. It's like, all right, fair point. That was always the age old, I'm bigger than you, I've got bigger arms, I've got bigger legs, I've got bigger X. It's like, you have got a point. So I'll just go.
Yeah. Do you even lift? Do you even lift, bro? That was usually the thing, wasn't it?
Definitely. So this will kind of segue us into a little bit into question 2. And I thought this was an important one to ask. And I don't know if this is a subject you've necessarily broached on any of the other podcasts you've been on, but you've wrote obviously this fantastic resource that I personally feel many more people should know about, entitled The Almost Inevitable Problem of Anxiety and Dieting, or How to Not Fuck Yourself Up While Getting Really, Really Lean. So yeah, given the goal of getting dick skin shredded, or labia lean, as Luke Leeman likes to call it, is becoming an increasingly more popular goal within the industry. And I think that's safe to say that body composition is probably on the rise in popularity again. Can you share what led, or should I say compel you to some degree to write the ebook? And what would you say are maybe the 1 to 3 main takeaways you'd hope people would gain from buying and reading the book? Small plug.
Yeah, it's a good thanks, mate. Yeah, it's a good question. Well, the book actually began initially as like a reflection on the last photo shoot prep. No, the last competition I prepped for. In that I kept like a sort of almost logbook diary, day by day, blow by blow account of things, including, you know, what I was training, what I was eating, but also like how I was feeling and what I was kind of going through. And at the end of that, I was like, well, let's write up a kind of lessons learned from prep style thing. And really, as I started writing, it occurred to me more and more, like I was talking more about the psychological management of getting very lean, and then more importantly, how you manage your headspace as you come back out of being very lean and inevitably have to gain back some body fat. And one thing led to another. I was like, okay, well, to make sense of that, I have to explain this other thing, and then this other thing, and then, okay. And so it kind of started building. I was like, I'm writing something more like an ebook here. And so I kind of wrote that. And then when I looked at it, I was like, it's a bit dry. It doesn't have a story through it. It's like, here's a problem, here's a psychological problem, here's a physiological problem. Meh. And I was like, okay, but people don't really relate to that. People relate generally to stories and going like, so, you know, I invented a protagonist called Steph, who had just gone through her first bikini show. And it was what she was thinking and feeling just as she's about to step out onto that stage under those lights for the first time and squeeze every part of her body while she's like freaking out, trying to keep it together. And then, oh crap, she wins, it goes really well. And after that, it's like, oh, wow, this was more validating than I thought it was going to be. But then she's finished the prep. So, okay, she accepts that she's got to regain some weight after that thing. And because she's understood that, well, I'm super hungry and feeling crappy all the time kind of at the moment. And so I'm going to have to gain a little bit. But she's built so much of her identity now on this thing that as she regains weight, it kind of freaks her out a little bit. So maybe she decides to do a bit more cardio or lower her calories a bit more than she planned. Or maybe she has that night out with some friends that she can now go on because she's no longer dieting and finds herself way drunker than she planned on getting because she's now an absolute lightweight. And that night out leads to eating all of the McDonald's that have ever existed near her. And then just this deep sense of regret and getting on the scale and, oh my God, what the hell has happened? And okay, let's do cardio, let's work harder. And then she finds herself binging, and then maybe she finds herself making herself sick for the first time or using laxatives and just all these kind of super actually common things that people don't really talk about within the industry and what goes on within managing that. So the book actually now opens up with Stephanie's story, which goes somewhat like I've just described, which hopefully is kind of interesting, insightful, humorous, hopefully in kind of places, and then sets up like, okay, how does this happen? Why do you relate to that story that I've just told you? Why does it make you smile in the places that it does, or make you laugh, or make you worried in the places that it does? And so then it's an exploration of the physiological reasons and psychological reasons why that stuff takes place. So, and then finally, okay, that's great. Now, what do you do with that? Like, does it have to be that way? There's the reason the book's called The Almost Inevitable Problem of Anxiety and Dieting is it's not inevitable, but it's super common, mainly because people don't really have an idea of how to deal with those things. Like, I learned more about how to deal with that side of things from dealing with OCD than anything else. And that's kind of really in part what led to that. So if there's three things to take away from it, it's probably a connection to the protagonist and the sort of types of thoughts and feelings she has or he has. It doesn't really matter whether you're male or female reading that thing, you'll kind of relate to that thing. I wrote it generally, this is a big generalization, but it does on average affect more females than males, hence why I made the protagonist female. But that's just a kind of choice within that. But so a connection to that, because without that, the rest doesn't really matter too much. Then ideally an understanding of the physiology and the psychology. So, the physiological mechanisms, like, okay, you've got bugger all body fat, so you've got no leptin. So no leptin means you're not feeling particularly satiated, ghrelin suppressed. So you're hungry all the time. And that is not going to resolve until you regain some body fat. Okay. Then these psychological things, like human beings have this thing called a negativity bias. So essentially, this is from Kahneman and Tversky, if anyone wants to check out where this initially was done. But they kind of found that we do not react the same amount to a positive and negative situation or stimulus of equal magnitude. So if I was to win 10 pounds, that'll feel good. Happy days, I'll feel not bad about it. But if I lose 10 pounds, that will feel a bit worse than the 10 pounds winning felt good. We have a disproportionate reaction to negative events. And so, if you relate that to something like the scale use, well, we know that body weight is going to fluctuate day by day, hour by hour, mainly due to water and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so when you step on that scale, you're going to see a bunch of readings. Some of them are going to go in the direction you'd like them to, and some of them are going to stay still, and some of them are going to go up. But you're going to react, most likely, more to the negative reading, the reading that didn't go the way you wanted it to, than the one that goes in the direction that you do. And so if we start plugging in this understanding of a negativity bias, a lack of a deadline anymore, the physiology of what's going on, we get an idea of, okay, that's why this comes about. And then, finally, it's the latter third of the book is literally a laundry list of strategies that you can do about those. Those strategies are subdivided into, these are cognitive strategies, these are behavioral strategies, these are sensation-based or physical-based kind of strategies. So that's going to run everywhere from basic gratitude journaling and understanding and meditation stuff, and cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. And even within that, there's a bunch of work by a guy. If this does affect anyone, there's a good researcher called Chris Fairburn, who's worth checking out, who was like the main first guy to start looking at eating disorder stuff. And he developed a type of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, if you don't know, called cognitive behavioral therapy enhanced, or CBTE, which was specifically formulated for bulimia and then binge eating disorder. So there's a bunch of stuff from that and how we would go about figuring that out and helping someone understand themselves, their issues, and then start to hopefully do something about it. So that's the kind of book, really.
Nice. There's two things I kind of want to dive a bit deeper into there, or not necessarily dive deeper, but it's just just interesting to get your take on is, firstly, one, how much of it do you think is down to people's expectations being managed accordingly going into that sort of process? Or, for example, not necessarily having that kind of longer term clarity of vision. So they kind of thought about the contest, they've thought about, right, or the photo shoot, I want to get to that point, but what about the exit strategy? What's the next set of goals? They thought about what it is they want to do after they've achieved that goal. And I think often it's just, well, that is the be all and end all. And then, right, well, like you say, their identity's been so wrapped up in that versus actually this is just a checkpoint along a much wider and longer journey.
Yeah.
How much?
Yeah, absolutely.
Plays in.
Yeah, like a huge amount. I guess the problem potentially with it is, if you're doing this for the first time, it's hard to imagine a situation you've never been in. Like, you can have exit strategies, and it's definitely worth the conversation. And you as a coach pointing some of those out or asking them questions so that the individual going through it can reflect upon what's happening to them. Because most people don't learn by you telling them stuff. They learn through experience and you getting them to reflect upon those things and be like, well, what do you think about this? And why do you think that happened? And where's the flaw in what's going on there? What might we run into? What are the common pitfalls? How are we going to deal with this? And just kind of if-then strategies and trying to get them to conceptualize it and what have you. So I actually think if someone has been through a couple of preps already, they've likely learned a bunch of these strategies without necessarily thinking about it in terms of like, oh, I've got these strategies in place now. They've just learned to navigate those waters through a bit of experience. And the fact that people who navigate it poorly basically don't go and do another prep because they found it too damaging. And so they kind of exclude themselves. So for me, anyone who's gone through like 2 success and wants to do a 3rd and has sort of navigated that is likely to be in an okay place. This is more of an issue for people who are doing it for the first time or maybe the second time, although it can be for people later on. The inherent problem we've got is that if it is your first time of doing it, you don't know what you don't know. And so it is a super difficult thing to help that person navigate. Even if because you can intellectually understand something, but that's still quite different to experiencing it. Like, plenty of people intellectually know that smoking is bad for them and they still struggle to stop doing it. Right? We have a discrepancy between an intellectual understanding and an experience, emotional based kind of understanding and ability to tolerate those uncomfortable feelings and thoughts when they turn up, even if you understand that they're irrational. It's like they're slightly different kind of skill set. So I think if you're a coach that does work with anyone who goes through those things, personally, I think you have an obligation to talk about that and to at least signpost those things, and ideally have some stuff in place where you can have conversations, make them aware of that stuff, make them aware, even if it does make the goal of getting shredded seem a bit less sexy, because you're not just talking about the pros about it, which is normally what you're supposed to do if you're selling something, right? It's just benefits, 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 baby. But like, that's not gonna, you're doing your client a disservice if you're gonna pretend to them that there aren't these big red flag areas and these big pitfalls. And so, you know, I've had a few clients over the years who we've started a prep and then through conversations just realized, yeah, this might not be right for you, at least not right now. Maybe we need to kind of get this kind of in place and build upon that. And it has to be individualized and you have to have those conversations. And it is difficult. I don't have a good panacea answer for how you solve that for the new people, because you don't know what you don't know.
For sure. And the funny thing is, it's good that you mentioned or touched on coaching and the coach's role, because that was going to be the next path I was going to somewhat meander down, was the responsibility of coaches in that situation. Because I've actually seen a lot of, and maybe it's just what I see out here in the Middle East and Dubai, and you know, there's a lot of physique athletes and stuff out here, and I actually see that even the more experienced ones have a lot of problems potentially with, you know, managing relationship with food and themselves, and it's just disguised in back-to-back season shows, and so they actually never really get to the fulcrum of actually addressing the root issues. So it can seem like they've got it together, they're so experienced at this, they really know how to navigate this, but actually they've just been able to hide for long enough without actually addressing all of the causes. And I always think, what happens when they stop competing, take some time off to have an off season, a proper off season? What happens? And I've seen it here. Like, I've seen people literally like go spiraling, and it take them a while to kind of almost.
And I would imagine as well that Dubai exacerbates that. You know, you're talking about a place which is very cool, but it is also renowned for its superficiality. And so, you know, there's this big emphasis on, you know, we're going to hang out at some beach club bar. Everyone's going to be shirtless. We're going to be getting kind of on it, but everyone looks sexy and awesome. And so if you've got a culture that has more of an emphasis on that as well, and you've decided to live there, right? By deciding to live there, you're also saying, I value some of the things this culture affords me. And so, okay, I'm already valuing how I appear very highly. Otherwise, you don't decide to go and do a show. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, just because if I did, I wouldn't do it myself. And so I'd be contradicting myself with my behavior. So clearly, I think there's some value in it. But if it's all that you are, if the only thing you define yourself as is your physique, you're in fucking danger. Because if nothing else, right, you're going to get older. Like, you're not going to be 25 forever. You're essentially, to use a car analogy, a depreciating asset. You're losing value as you drive off that parking lot, because you're going to become 50 and you're not going to look as good as you did at 25, unless you looked awful at 25 and phenomenal at 50. But even if you extend that out, you're going to get to 70, you're going to get to 80. At some point, you're not going to look like you were. And worse than that, there are new 20-year-olds all of the time popping up and being kind of shiny. And so you should absolutely cultivate some of your worth on your appearance. And I don't think you cannot do that. I think we are an evolutionarily sexually selective species. And that means we give a fuck what we look like, because we want people to fuck us so we can pass on our genes. And you can't do away with that any more than you can do away with hunger and erections. So if we've got that in place, it's then, how do I make sure that, like diversifying assets, if something terrible happens, you don't lose your entire sense of identity? Because, you know, it'd be a financial investment strategy to not put all of your eggs in one basket, to not put it all in, all the stock I've got should go into Bitcoin, and be like, yeah, maybe you should put some in Bitcoin and some in Tesla and some in this and some in that. And that way, yeah, if something goes wrong, because, you know, God forbid you get hit by a car or something terrible happens, or you have this crisis of identity. Well, if it is all that you are, that isn't a crisis of your entire being, rather than a partial crisis of your being. If you are also identifying yourself and valuing being a friend, a family member, a partner, a writer, a musician, whatever it is that you want to value, it's up to you. You get to figure out what your values are. And I guarantee you, if you really ask yourself deeply, you will come to the conclusion that you don't want your only value to be, I had great abs and a phenomenal ass. Like, no one wants that to be their fucking tombstone. I mean, like, yeah, this is what I want people to remember me for. It's like, yeah, it might be part of it, but like, you know, you want more than that. So, well, then you've got to figure that out, and you've got to start really behaving in a way that demonstrates that you do value more than those things. And it's hard. It is hard. And you're right. Plenty of people mask that stuff, and they tell themselves they're going to have an off season, and then they don't, right? Because the moment they start gaining some weight, it's like, nah, let's do another prep, right? And then they kind of get into that. Or, you know, we see the same things. Like, I'm a lifetime natural, which is obvious if you've ever seen me, because I'm long and gangly for the most part. And I'd be upset if I'd taken some gear and this is all it had left me. But how often do we see people who use something, you know, they start on maybe a lowish dose of some substance, and then when they come off, they start shrinking and they don't like it. So rather than taking the 6-8 weeks, however long they were going to have off cycle, they take 3. And then rather than just going back to what they were on, they take a bigger dose, or they start stacking substances, right? And then they never have a cycle where they come off. And this issue is not unique to just identifying yourself as just your physique. It's the same type of issue that turns up with, you know, whether it's the athlete who has identified himself solely as the sportsman, and then they retire, and who the fuck are they now? And so they develop a drinking habit, or they get caught doing some kind of stuff that's definitely getting them on the front page of the Daily Mail. Or we've got the mother who is so invested in her kids that she's forgotten to be anything other than a mother. And now those kids have grown up and left, and, well, who are you now? It's the problem of identifying yourself as just one thing. That could manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. But when we see it in the gym, it's the only thing you're demonstrating that you value is your physique. And that is a problem. And we need to talk about it. So yeah, hopefully that made some kind of sense.
100%, and I think it's a good way to segue into the next question anyway, but to probably finish on that is, that's why I respect any good coach, because we can have these conversations and have them very bluntly and very openly. And that's why I respect my coach Callum, Callum Rystrick, so much, is just that he's very good at kind of, right, I'm going to get what I need out of you, but I'm also very, he's very interested. But what about the other stuff that's going on? Is this how you managing your business alongside this? How's your relationships going? And I think all the good coaches that I know are very considerate of all of the other stuff, and not just the, right, well, progress is moving, let's just keep calories and macros there, see you later next week. It's just definitely not like that. So it doesn't surprise me that we're going down that path as far as that conversation goes. And
yeah, you're right. You're just going like, it turns out that you have to give a fuck about the person on the other end of it. And that tends to be one of the big things that makes great coaches.
Yeah, and it's funny, you think that was, and I guess it depends the circles you walk in or surround yourself in, right? But we almost take that as a bit of a given that would just be what you do. But unfortunately, that doesn't make up the majority of the industry. But we can only help those who want to be helped, right? So moving on from one rant to another, or talking about rants, your social media content is one of the biggest things that's been well received, is your rather infamous fitness rants. And I think many other coaches wish they could probably produce same type of content, or at least content similar, but they probably feel it would come across either forced, or they feel being judged and ridiculed. So firstly, what made you decide to start making fitness rants and those type of posts? And secondly, what advice would you have for other coaches or people in general who suffer from, I like to call it, content anxiety?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to give credit to my friend Gordon Greenhorn. If you don't know, follow Gordon online. He's worth follow. Gordon was my very first coach way back in like 2013, whenever that was, a while ago, and is a good friend of mine now. And he essentially suggested one day that I should do something like a Russell Kane meets fitness kind of thing. Is like, you're too entertaining at these instance. Why are you not doing a thing with that? That just sounded like I was blowing smoke up my own ass there, didn't it? Let's pretend that didn't sound terrible. And so really it came back thanks to Gordon just being like, do a thing with that. And I was like, yeah, okay, I can see what you're getting at. I understand what the Russell Kane style things look like. I should point out, like, I have a background in acting. I went to drama school for 3 years way back, kind of before I became a PT after.
A lot.
Yeah, it very rarely surprises anyone when I tell them that. So that is something that probably comes, at least these days, relatively naturally to me, and feels like a kind of part of me, probably a bit more of an amplified part of me. And I'd like to think I'm maybe a bit more considered most of the time as well. But I absolutely like taking the piss out of things and making jokes and being kind of a bit silly and all that stuff as well. I think often we think people either have to be, you're the intelligent person, or you're the sporty person, or you're the silly person. Siri is designed to talk to me on my phone. And I think that's bullshit. I think you could be all of those things, and what have you. So it started as a result of that, of being like, okay, well, then the question of like, well, what to rant about, which is the same question really you've got of like, how do you get over content anxiety? And I suppose this is actually going to relate to a friend of ours called Simon Mitchell, and a book he recommended to me, where I stole some kind of things from recently, which I'll get to. And the book's called On Writing Well by William Zinsser. But for me, it was really like, if you ask yourself this question, what do you really mean? Like, what opinions do you have that you really stand by? Like, and by that, like, what could you talk nerdily about for a while? And like, when I say nerdily, I kind of mean that bit of, if you're passionate about something, you tend to get passionate about weird little details and odd shit that you can tell a story about. Like, playing Final Fantasy VII when I was in my teenage years, or my early teenage years, reminds me of being at my nan's house and this particular smell of mothballs that was up in the attic that I played this video game in. And you could get into, I got stuck on the end of the first disc of Temple of the Ancients, and people who understand what I'm talking about right now are like, yeah, like, don't be afraid to get in on this stuff where like some people aren't going to get that particular reference. But if you mean it, it's genuine for you, there's going to be people who are going to get that. And even if they're not, like, there's going to be something within there that, even if you're talking about a topic I don't give a shit about, if you can find a way to say it that's engaging and interesting, I'll kind of pay attention. So this bit came from that book. So the book's called On Writing Well. And William Zinsser puts this kind of better than I could for most things. So at this point, there's a little paragraph from this. I'm like, here's probably the best advice I've got. It's page 91 and it's called Go With Your Interests. And he just writes, there's no subject you don't have permission to write about. Students often avoid subjects close to their heart, skateboarding, cheerleading, rock music, cars, etc., because they assume that their teachers will regard those topics as stupid. No area of your life is stupid to someone who takes it seriously. If you follow your affections, you'll write well and you will engage your readers. I've read elegant books on fishing and poker, billiards and rodeos, mountain climbing and giant sea turtles, and many other subjects I didn't think I was interested in. Write about your hobbies: cooking, gardening, photography, knitting, antiques, jogging, sailing, scuba diving, tropical birds, tropical fish. Write about your work, teaching, nursing, running a business, running a store. Write about a field you enjoyed in college and always meant to get back to: history, biography, art, archaeology. No subject is too specialized or too quirky if you make an honest connection with it when you write about it. So what is it that you care kind of deeply and interestedly about, and how could you communicate that in an engaging way? Like he uses, I really enjoy the opening of a chapter he gives from this guy called E.B. White, was writing in 1944 at the height of World War II, and it's called The Hen, an Appreciation. And the opening gambit for the hen goes like this: chickens do not always enjoy an honorable position among city-bred people, although the egg, I notice, goes on and on. Right now, the hen is in favor. The war has deified her, and she is the darling of the home front, feted at conference tables, praised in every smoking car. Her girlish ways and curious habits, the topic of many an excited husbandryman, to whom yesterday she was but a stranger without honor or allure. And I don't give two shits about chickens, but suddenly I'm like, if you're going to tell me about chickens, that's a great way of opening the gambit. Tell me about chickens. I'm like, anyone who's willing to open their thing like that, I'm like, okay, I'll at least pay any attention. So it's like, so what are you passionate about? What do you care about? What are your opinions on that thing? What's an interesting way of saying it? If you're writing something down and you're bored of your own writing with it, or your own presentation of that, stop and figure out a better way to say it, or a more interesting. Don't just put something out there for the sake of putting it out there if it isn't adding some value to the person on the receiving end of it. Is it teaching them something? If it is it teaching them in a way that they could go out and use, or is it engaging or super informative? There's no reason. Like, I do fucking nerdy videos on a whiteboard that involve algebra. Like, that's got a super niche like audience for that particular thing. But I'll also do a rant about dumb shit I've heard in the gym, and stupid stuff I've done kind of over the years. As long as you mean it, is it real to you? You can kind of run off on that. So figure that out. And the act of writing is really the act of rewriting. Your first draft, whatever you put down on paper is in your notes that you're going to put on your Instagram post or whatever it is, the first draft will suck. It will be boring. It will be shit. It will have too many words. You'll repeat yourself too many times. It'll do all those things. So the key is to rewrite it, write it, and sit back down with it and go like, and I read these things out loud to myself. Like, and maybe it helps because I have a performing background, but you'll feel the rhythm of how that thing reads when spoken out loud. You're like, okay, that jars a bit, or I used this same word too many times. Maybe I should stop describing things as delicious, right? There's only so many times that's going to work. And I think the same is true if you're doing more video stuff, depending on the type of thing that it is. Often the key to making those things engaging is in the editing. The rants I do are edited, and so I can chop them up for kind of comedic effect, or have a quick turnaround between things that gets ruined if you leave a big kind of in the thing. Like, if I film them essentially behind where I'm currently sat, and if I was to put all the things in there, you'll see plenty of times where I'm essentially staring at my feet, or trying to think of maybe the next kind of thing to say sometimes, or is there a better way I could say that? I tend to start with like an outline of, here's the topic of the rant, here's notes I'll have made on it and shit I'll have put down, and like, okay, I think that's a vaguely funny way of saying that, or an interesting way of saying it. As long as I mean it, again, I'm going to keep coming back to that bit. Like, if you don't mean it, you're just saying something to be, a bit controversial, but you don't stand by it, you haven't really thought it through, well, maybe don't say it. You don't really mean it, you're just doing it for the sake of something else. But if you really mean it, if it's a genuinely held conviction, you can make it interesting or funny or what have you, have at it. That we like those weird details about people. So you kind of run with that. And then I guess the final one, arguably the most important one, is be really good at what you do. And so you're going to have to go courses and spend some money and hire mentors and hire a coach you respect so you can see how they work and you can pick things up kind of from them and bounce ideas off them. And eventually you build like a circle of people that I can like message and be like, what do you think of this idea? Or is that stupid? Or even you'll get ideas from conversations you're having with people in the industry of like, oh, that one keeps coming up. Or a conversation you have with a client where they say something silly that made you laugh and you're like, oh, that could be a funny way of making that kind of point, or a little story to tell. Or there's shit everywhere if you're paying attention. But like you can get really good at rants or writing or whatever that thing is. But if the substance of your coaching skills is shit, well, yeah, you'll generate probably a bunch of interest initially, but your client turnover rate will be super high and your business will likely burn out and you'll get kind of fed up. So fundamentally, all that other stuff is less important than being really good at whatever skill that you're particularly selling, which for PTs is the ability to apply forces to the person kind of in front of you and run you through that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the two massive things I probably take away with that is one, authenticity. If it's not authentic, it's probably going to show, and people can read through that, especially if they've got a bit of modicum of emotional intelligence, they'll usually get through that. And even if you get a lot of superficial following or likes in the beginning, people eventually will see past that. And I think that one of the big points I think is so important is, and something I wish I did a lot earlier in my career, and I've kind of done more mentoring with other coaches as I'm being mentored in probably the second half of my career than I did in the first half. And the growth within that has been exponential, because like you say, what are the people that are doing where I want to be or have this level of knowledge or skill set or results that I want to achieve? How can I seek out those people? And I think that's a massive lesson for any of the coaches, not even the coaches listening to this, but anyone who's in any form of profession who wants, like, I'm fed up of being where I am right now and I want something to change. Go seek someone who can help you get there.
Yeah, it's a cliche, but I'm the same as you. In this latter half of my career up to this point anyway, the more money I have spent on going to things in education and spending time with people that I respect, well, the more money I've ended up earning. Like, those two things don't seem accidentally correlated. And yeah, the same thing actually, just briefly on the authenticity part, is like a good friend of mine and client of mine, I don't know if you know Mike Samuels, he's known as the coffee shop copywriter, kind of thing. So Mike, has been a friend of mine and a client for a fair while. And Mike, I've mentioned this about him on, I can't remember whose podcast this was, but Mike is a phenomenal writer. He's genuinely a great writer. He writes with personality and verve, and to the point, he's great. He's much better writer than I am. But for a period of time, he played around with like video stuff and realized that just really wasn't him. He's not a person who like naturally feels, yeah, I love being in front of a camera or in front of an audience and entertaining in that kind of way. Like, he tried it and went, no, this isn't for me. And I remember the first time I met Mike, I'd already been reading loads of his stuff, and I met him in person. I was like, wow, you're so much quieter than I thought you would be based on the personality of the writing. But that was for him. Like, you've got to figure out what is authentic to you. And annoyingly, that sometimes means you need to play a little bit with what feels inauthentic and being like, all right, am I a writer yet? Because you can't feel authentically good at something straight out the gate, because you won't be good at it. Like, you might have a bit more natural aptitude than other people. Fair enough. There's definitely a component of that. But relative to the standard of people who are good at it, you're going to be shit. So it's going to take a little bit of playing around and being like, all right, let's try this writing thing for a little bit. Let's try this video thing. Let's get some feedback from people I respect. Does it feel like me? Can I stare at it? It's going to be work. But yeah, I think you're kind of right. Authenticity is going to be a big one, even though it's hard to pin down what the hell that word means. Yeah,
that could be a 20-minute conversation in of itself. But we'll park that baby for the moment. I'm throwing in a surprise question at you. So this is not actually one that I shared on the list of questions, but it just, and it's something that I remember you speaking about, and I thought I really would like to dive into that as well, because it's something that we brought up on the group calls with Michael and the crew during the weekly study calls, and we started to touch on the idea, or at least the limitations of much of the training research that's out there. And I know this is something you have a very strong opinion about, as do I as well. And so what do you feel are probably the biggest gaps or limitations when it comes to training research, in particular training for what we're very interested in, which is getting really big muscles?
The biggest hole is a lack of appreciation for Newtonian mechanics and physics. And when I say Newtonian mechanics, really what I'm talking about is the study of kinematics, which is the study of motion, which is the first year of any physics like degrees, you tend to start kind of there, and we don't account for it. So, you know, in the research, if someone says, oh, they used a leg extension versus a leg press, as though, oh, well, so that leg extension must be the same as my leg extension, which must be the same as that leg press, because all leg presses and all leg extensions are definitely the same as each other. It's like, no, they're not. So unless you're starting to specify which machine you used, and then I want to see a breakdown of where that machine is hard and where it's easy. I want to see a photo of the cam. I want a description of, well, the moment arm is this long at this point and this long at this point. I want a discussion of how fast that person moved it, because the speed they lift it at inherently changes the forces we're dealing with. And I want that discussion to include the fact that different pulley systems, for example, mean that different speeds affect you differently. If I have what's known as a 2-to-1 or 4-to-1, we're getting technical, so it might be leaving people behind here. I don't know what the level is for this kind of one. But if we've got this 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 pulley system thing, I can pull more aggressively on that, and it won't change the forces as rapidly as if I did that on a 1-to-1 pulley system, or just with a dumbbell or a barbell or a kettlebell or a weight on a leg press, although that would depend on the angle of the leg press. And it's like, unless you're accounting for these things, look, science is supposed to be the study of controlling for all of the variables you possibly can to look at the effect of varying one of them. And if you are not accounting for these variables that make up physical reality itself, how the fuck are you telling me you're doing science? That is an insult to what that's supposed to mean. And we don't notice it, and it's fucking retarded and ridiculous. Like, I've been to seminars with Brad Schoenfeld and co, and heard people ask him, like, okay, you know, do you account for the sternum angle? Does that make any difference to the bench press? And I've heard the man go like, I don't see why that would matter. And it's not that he's obviously not a very smart human being who has done lots of stuff for the industry, and fair enough. But that tells us that we can have a PhD at the highest level of this industry who doesn't understand leverage, which is the same shit that I use to open a door or use a seesaw. That's lever mechanics. That's not complicated shit. What do you mean the sternum angle doesn't matter? Of course it matters. I can demonstrate it with a piece of wood and a stick, some string applied to it, and just pulling it around an axis and go, look, see this angle? See how effective it is at creating rotation? If I now change this angle, can you see how it doesn't rotate it as effectively? That's what your fucking sternum angle does. How are you telling me that doesn't matter? You've got a PhD. How are we doing exercise science when we don't control for physics at a level that has to be the obvious? I'm ranting here. That has to be the obvious level, because you know, this mechanics is the stuff that means that this is why bridges stand up and work. This is why buildings function as buildings and don't just fall down. This is how we can launch rockets into space, or predict how far you'll jump when I launch you down a ski ramp. Like, they are so well ingrained, so well established physical phenomena that you can practice and demonstrate and test and repeat time and time and time again, and it will give you the same answer time and time and time again, that they are without question or doubt now. And so compared to any other variable we have in fitness, nothing is more established than these engineering principles, essentially, which are Newtonian mechanics. And so until we account for these things in the research, how are we really saying, oh, I know that conclusion? Now, they might turn out to be moderately irrelevant. That's perfectly possible and plausible. But they strike me as being giant, glaring holes that need to be addressed. Here, rant out.
I love that I managed to get a fitness rant on the podcast. Ideal. It's funny, I was having a chat with Mal earlier, and I kind of said, like, you know, the more, you know, certainly I've looked at some of this stuff over the last 4 years, but certainly as we're diving deeper into the RTS stuff, and there's just things that come up like out of the blue, and you're thinking, well, hold on a minute. Like, and I remember Menno Henselman's talking about a hip thrust study or whatever else, and I know that, again, he also made a bit of a disparaging kind of, well, I don't see how that matters type comment towards some of the other variables. And I was kind of, I was like, it was funny, I was thinking, you're 5 foot nothing. She's not actually 5 foot nothing, but she's very short. And I have a client who is like 180 centimeters almost. And I put those two in a hip thrust. And I'm meant to then say, right, there's the 20 women in this study. Mal has femurs that are like a, you know, chicken drumstick length. And then I've got, you know, my other client who's got massively long femurs. You're telling me that difference in woman arm doesn't have an effect on the outcome of that exercise for those two individuals. where Mal clearly has quite a bit of mechanical advantage for being that little shorty versus the other client who's got way bigger moment arms to come across. Now, granted, there are other things that might come into that, bigger muscle mass size or strength capabilities and all that stuff. But yeah, I started thinking about all these different scenarios. And I thought, how can you tell me that that shouldn't be accounted for in a study? So what would they have to do? They'd have to control, right, well, you'd have to almost create like a relative scale of, right, well, we've controlled for the relative moment arm length so that regardless of the height of the individual, this has been matched. But you don't see any of that stuff.
No, you need to do some kind of multivariate analysis, which happens in plenty of stuff where we go, okay, this was the average outcome, but when we account for variance of femur length, it accounts for 20% of this difference between them. When we account for muscle mass size, it accounts for another percentage of it. That's all you really need to do. And we'd slowly over time come to some kind of better understanding. We wouldn't get it in one study. That's fine. I'm not expecting, I realize how difficult this is to do, like to some degree, but it's not impossible to do. Like it just involves putting a few extra details into the thing and accounting for them. It's really not that complex. And like, as you touched on, of course that we, even from an eyeball perspective, like if we took the Chinese Olympic weightlifting team, they look very different to an NBA team. That's not incidental or accidental when it comes to the sport they perform. There's a reason Michael Phelps had arms the length of like the River Nile and just paddle boat hands. It's like, yeah, of course that helps him swim. Like we appreciate and understand it and sort of accept it when we're looking at just sports. We kind of come to this understanding that, yeah, there are body types that suit that sport. Okay, so why are we not running with that same idea and going, oh, maybe there's a difference. Maybe your body type and structure and proportionality plays a role in the forces that you're exposed to. And no shit, yes, of course it does. And yeah, it would be great if we started, applying that idea. I'm not holding my breath anytime soon, but it would be good.
No, there's too many people who have got vested interests or have a certain set of quote unquote credentials that, they have to in keep with the establishment. And this is how we currently do things. And this is how data is currently presented. But I guess like, almost a bit of a side question before we get into the last question is, okay, assuming that we can't, or at the moment, we're not going to see any research which controls for those variables, how do we take the current research that we have? And what would you say would be, if you were, advising other coaches to take research that is available, how do you apply that in, the trenches in the real world with clients? Because we can't discard necessarily all of the information. There's going to be some valuable stuff there, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it puts more, I used to have more faith in research than I have now. So I used to run more things through. The research says we should do 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week, right? And so cool, I'd run with those kind of things. I'd read the muscle and strength pyramids, and so I was using whatever was coming out of the muscle and strength pyramids as my general guidelines. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with still using that to inform some decision, just in the same way we could go, okay, this understanding of exercise mechanics. What we can't say is that applying these things definitely leads to more muscle growth than not applying these things, because people have been getting jacked for ages and they don't know shit they don't understand what a moment arm is in the slightest, and it hasn't stopped them getting massive. So we definitely can't say that. We can demonstrate, and I can show you with just a couple of models and demonstrations, that the joint forces these people go through are going to be potentially wildly different, and that for different people, we're going to burn their shoulders out way faster doing this bench press than if we pick something else. Whereas, a Ben Pekulski might be fine benching forever. The distance his arms have to go to touch his rib cage or touch the bar to the rib cage, because that's the distance the bar has to go, obviously, is wildly different to me with my giraffe arms. And so, that's going to kind of play a role. But if we're going to use that research stuff, well, we can still say, okay, maybe there is something to this volume idea. It seems unlikely, based on everything, that one set is as effective as more than one set. But we've got a problem within there of going like, okay, but what kind of set and how effectively was it targeted? And all these questions that are going to come up from the mechanics world. And I think they're important questions. I agree with basically all of them. However, I also think it likely that there is a relationship to volume that these things go with. I think we've seen that enough times repeatedly that we could use that. EMG stuff, I think, is harder to want to use than I used to use EMG. EMG was my only go-to for like, this is how I would differentiate an exercise that did this versus this, because I had no understanding of physics stuff. Now I would largely I don't want to say completely disregard, but unless it came for the ride with some other information, I'm not that interested. I remember I did a post about a research study that looked at EMG for the triceps and how much the triceps had to fire in differing positions of shoulder flexion or extension, which is fair enough. That's a good question. That's a cool thing to study. But they did it with just the weight of their arm. So they had their arm by their side, like if you were doing a normal push down with a cable, and just letting their arm go down. I'm like, well, you don't need any tricep output to lower your arm from by your side. Gravity will do that. Like I demoed it with my skeleton and went, right, Albert Speinstein here doesn't have a tricep. Let's see how much tricep output he requires to get his arm back down. 0, because he doesn't have a tricep, and yet his arm is now down by his side. So you're like, what is that EMG supposed to tell me? It hasn't accounted for the direction of force and what's going on. And then as it moved around, okay, that changes things. But what I could see with the EMG is going, yeah, it's kind of doing what I'd expect it to do relative to the forces going. So when the arm gets above the head, and now gravity wants to take the forearm and rotate it around in such a way that the tricep has something to do, oh yeah, there's now more EMG output. No shit. But unless we've got these other kind of bits and pieces, does that mean anything to me? So with regards to the training stuff, I'm definitely a lot more skeptical than I used to be. And I don't know if I use that much of it in informing my coaching practice now from a training perspective. Now, when it comes to nutrition and other stuff, I think we've got more scope to kind of use that through there and going, okay, yeah, people, whether you want to get into the nerdy details of chrononutrition and timing it around different times of the day or light exposure kind of stuff, there's super cool things going on and around there. Whether that matters for most of your clients, I think probably not. And we can get too nerdy with that stuff and fail to have a conversation with this person who is also an accountant who just wants to be reasonably in shape around being an accountant and therefore doesn't want their entire life to revolve around, okay, I need you to get outside first thing in the morning upon sunrise, get your feet in the grass, we need a certain lux reading. Yeah, okay, right? It's like that doesn't work that well kind of for their life. But that's perfectly legit, interesting research to go kind of nerd out on. So research absolutely has its place, but yeah, I'm struggling more with incorporating the training research maybe than I used to. How about you? What have you kind of thought with that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel evidence-based as a term I've also just become a bit off with, because I feel like it's now becoming a camp of the evidence-based and the charlatans. And I kind of feel like, and I can't remember if you used the term, but I really like it, is evidence-informed. I prefer the idea of the evidence can inform decision-making, but it's not going to dictate it. So I'll certainly listen to things. I'll see what's there. I'll have a little read through the study, what were the control variables. But ultimately, I'm now going to say, right, but I still have to take this information and marry it with all of these other factors plus the mechanics, and then I can make a decision around it. So it's, certainly factor it in, but it's not going to be, I certainly wouldn't be making any sweeping statements from the current training research either, personally.
Yeah, I agree. There's a good term that actually came out of medicine, because, evidence-based practice came out of medicine initially, of being like, all right, it's enough to say these are, what has been done before is the way we shall always do this. And I think I first came across this. Ben Goldacre, if you've never read Bad Science, is a funny book from kind of way back when. So I was talking about all these things. But there then came this thing of science-based practice, which was this idea of being like, okay, I don't need studies all the time into homeopathy to disprove the newest part of homeopathy that has decided to come out, because it doesn't have a rationale behind it that agrees with any of the scientific consensus by which things can work, right? Like distilling an object in more and more water so that there's a smaller and smaller amount of it does not increase its effect. That distills its effect. That's the whole point of distilling. And so do I need another study looking at that? Because, well, unless there is a study saying it definitely doesn't, well, then we can't say it's evidence-based. It's like, yes, you can, because it's science-based. Like at this point, there's no way that has a plausible explanation, and I don't need to waste funding on that particular nuance. Obviously, these things have to be in conversation with each other, because if we say that, it's like, well, are you saying that certain things are beyond reproach, that we should always accept what they are because that's what no, of course not. These things have to be able to be challenged, But that doesn't mean we should challenge everything equally. It doesn't mean we have a completely open mind. We're not like, you know, a sieve. You have to actually keep some ideas in the brain. Otherwise, not all ideas are equal, shockingly. Like some things are better than others. And we have to be able to discern those. And as you say, like use that information to go like, how am I going to take this and apply it to my clients? Like, well, there's too many variable differences for this person in front of me. But the principles, which would be science-based practice of physics and engineering, well, I know them to be true. I know them to be truer than basically anything else that we use. Otherwise, my phone wouldn't work. I wouldn't be able to sit here on Zoom and talk to you. We wouldn't be able to make a podcast. I wouldn't have a car, and the world wouldn't work the way the world works. And so the fact it can do all those things is built upon the efficacy that these approaches, mechanics, and everything that came after that are built upon. They're solid. They've been subject to like debate and downside for ages and seem to still be working. I don't think we need to question them as much. So if I'm thinking of a science-based approach, not just an evidence-based approach when it comes to training, I'm putting physics on a higher pedestal than your research that involves some EMG. I just am.
Yeah, I think that just makes a lot of sense. I think that this is just, I suppose, a bit of a side to that as well, is that almost if there's no evidence available, then your anecdote still doesn't matter. But I think there's a lot of anecdotal and experiential data that many good coaches over years and years and years have captured, that things work despite not having evidence for it. And so I think given the fact that it exists, that in itself shows that, well, firstly, we just don't have all the answers. But yeah, I definitely like that way of describing it. There's just certain things, I almost call it like it's like there's like kind of quantum physics and physiology, and there's certain things that we've established so well that do we really need to waste time arguing about that specifically? And so I like the way of a science-based approach married with a evidence-informed approach. There we go.
Because evidence is just one part of science. It's not the only part of science, right? And so, yeah, that absolutely means we shouldn't just be discarding evidence. But it does mean we need to appraise evidence critically. And the way you appraise it critically is through other parts of the scientific process, which include logic, which include established and accepted physics, and in that case, mathematics, and kind of everything else that where you go like, this has been repeatedly tested and demonstrated its validity. Let's accept that. If you come out with a thing that says gravity isn't real, fuck me, it best be thorough. Like it must, like, you know what I mean? Like there's so much suggesting, no, that seems to be a thing that's binding, like so much relies upon it that if you try and state that that's true, your evidence must be awesome.
Or we've all been living a lie, and
the
Holy One has descended to us all.
Yeah, exactly. Jesus came down, he took away our gravity.
That guy, hate that guy. So we're going to move on to the final question, and then after that we actually have the quick fire round, which is a bunch of random questions that you have no idea about, which is always an absolute joy for me. So I left this question till last, and given that it is very in keeping with the times, let's talk a bit about mechanosets and diving deeper into algebra and physics equations. And it's just funny that we were talking a bit about that there. So it's fair to say many are starting to recognize you, certainly within the kind of little niche of our kind of group of coaches who really enjoy this exercise mechanics thing, definitely starting to see you as the physics guy when it comes to the exercise mechanics side of things. So what is it that intrigued you specifically to dive down this rabbit hole, and how do you feel coaches would benefit from increasing their understanding of this side of exercise mechanics and applying it in their practice?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it was because I couldn't find some of the answers I wanted to questions I had. So, when you get into this mechanics world, I think of mechanics as two things, right? It's the study of anatomy and forces, because really it's the application of forces to anatomy. So we best understand two things pretty well, anatomy and forces. I think a large amount of the industry, rightly so, has gone down clarifying anatomy and getting crystal clear on origins, insertions, directions, planes, paths of motion, joint ranges, active range, passive, all those things that we absolutely need. And I would maybe even argue for the practitioner are more important than, some algebra on a board. I actually would say that. Like if you're starting out, emphasize that stuff kind of first. You're going to get more out of it. It's going to have more value to your clients than this other kind of stuff. This extra thing, I think, layers in a depth of understanding that definitely increases your confidence with what you're doing and kind of provides more clarity to just your eyeballs as you're seeing stuff. Like you see things through a lens where you're like, velocity and force and torque and this kind of other bunch of shit. You know, it was because for me, I wanted to know, well, okay, what is the difference between if I lower a bench press at like 0.5 meter a second versus 2 meters per second? Like, what are the differences in forces that actually exposes me to? Or like, how much weight am I actually specifically dealing with on a leg press that's at a different angle to another angle? And how do I know that? How do I find that? And how do I test that to show that it is true? Rather than these things being kind of esoteric. Like if we've spoken about force angles before, okay, well, we know that a force angle of 90 degrees is the most effective angle we can get at creating torque. But how much does it differ if I go from 90 to 76 degrees, or if I go from 12 degrees to 37 degrees? Like how much exactly do those things change what I'm being exposed to? And the answers to all those questions is in physics. And then the answer in physics is maths. And so it was very much a case of, and by the way, I didn't have and don't have a maths background. Like I got a B at GCSE and didn't really give two shits. Like I didn't care about trigonometry and SOHCAHTOA and Pythagoras and algebra and all that kind of stuff. And the only reason I care about it now is because it helps me evaluate these kind of things. And turns out was the answer to those questions. Because, well, again, maths is the language of physics. And if you don't understand any of it, you won't be able, they'll just look like weird things on a whiteboard or a blackboard. But the cool thing when you start playing with it is you're like, oh, I can do this. I can put numbers in here and it will tell me what I'm about to experience. And then when I test it, it's exactly what those numbers told me it was going to be. And you're like, I have seen through the matrix. It gives you some weird. There's only two experiences when you're doing math stuff related to physics. You either get two sensations. One, if it works how you wanted it to work and it's gone well and you've solved it, you're like, I am God. This is amazing. I'm a genius. Or there's a sensation of, I'm a fucking idiot. I hate this. Why won't this work? What am I missing? Fuck all this. Let me throw my board out the window. There's no in-between sensation. It's very much smug satisfaction or just self-loathing and hatred. They're your two options with these kind of things. But so, yeah, it was an exploration of how do I get to those bits? And then also, how can I show people that those things that seem strange and abstract, like, why should I give a shit about triangles? Like, and SOHCAHTOA and those things. It's like, no, because here's why. And I can show you how much you're dealing with on this angled leg press here. This thing's going to give you 47% of the load than the one up here. And that's why you can lift the load more. And so if you're accounting for how much weight you want to do to work your legs on this thing, or you want to figure out how to band it or reverse band it, we need to understand the angle, because without understanding the angle, I don't know how much weight you're dealing with. And if I don't know how much weight you're dealing with, how much band tension do I need to know to put on there? And so the answer to these questions is found in these things. And once you get a little bit past the fear of a small bit of algebra, it's actually relatively simple for most of the things that you're going to solve, right? You just need to know some sines and cosines of some angles and what those mean and how to plug them into a calculator. And then you'll be kind of fine from there. And as far as who benefits from it, I think a certain type of coach is likely to benefit more from others. Like, I think, as we said, if you're starting out, start with RTS, start with Integra, start with Michael, start with that kind of thing. You're going to get way more from getting in a room and getting the rope out and like seeing, okay, where's this 90-degree T shape? Where's this moment arm? Can I see these things that are being described, rather than sitting down and beginning them with a conversation of like, okay, the lever arm is the longest point from the axis to the point of application. The moment arm is the perpendicular distance, but right, what? You'll learn it and what it means in person by playing with it and using it much more than sitting down with a whiteboard. However, once you've kind of got that, these things then allow you to appreciate what those things are, to understand them in a much greater detail. And then if someone wants to come and criticize something I put out, like, I can defend it to a very granular level, right? And it's because that understanding is built on Newtonian mechanics and physics, is built on the same stuff. Oh, these are the same equations we use when we're talking about firing a cannonball or launching a rocket into space or building a bridge. And bridges keep standing and rockets keep working. So I'm pretty sure these principles are correct. And so we go back to the same thing we kind of touched on. So it's like, okay, that makes me very confident then that, if I've done this evaluation of a rack chin or a push-up and I go, okay, we've got this idea we have a center of mass. It has a distance to an axis that creates a torque. I have a certain amount of forces. I know that the floor is pushing up on the feet and it's pushing up on the hands here. Well, how much is in each? You learn a few of these bits and pieces and you go, okay, I think I understand that. Let's put it all together. Let's make some predictions based on, and some of the predictions have to be a little bit general, like where the center of mass is in a human being varies a little bit person to person. Like generally it's accepted to be just above the sacrum-ish height-wise, and obviously somewhere in the kind of middle of you. But if you've got a massive upper body and no legs, maybe it's a bit higher. If you're missing 2 arms, it's going to be lower. Like it's not a specific place that doesn't move around. So even if we go, okay, this is my stick man, this is my drawing, this is what's going on, the precise numbers are going to be a little bit different person to person. But you then go, okay, so I've done this. I think I've calculated it. Well, let's go test it. Let's see, am I right or am I talking out my ass? Do the numbers I've just come up with translate to a readout that I could empirically test? And so for like a push-up one, for me, it was like, well, let's just get a couple of basic weighing scales and I can put one underneath each hand and one on my feet and go like, okay, do those numbers through each of the hands and through the feet add up to what I calculated they should add up to, pretty much accepting the small error rates because of center of mass movements. Do they add up to that? Yes or no? Yes, sweet. This seems to describe reality. How about, I saw a thing the other day. Someone had claimed that a rack chin was a good back exercise because it had a nice pulling profile, meaning the profile got easier as they pulled through. So when they were dead hanging, it's at its hardest, and then the moment arm would decrease and it would get easier as they pulled to the top of the rack chin. And that was their rationale for doing the rack chin, because it's wonderful profile. I was like, that's not true. It doesn't do that. And so I did a breakdown just with the whiteboard of like, no, the center of mass stays quite close to the hands and doesn't get any closer to the foot support. Therefore, it's this distance really between the center of mass from the hands and the center of mass to the foot that determines how much weight is being taken by each. And so you kind of go through that. You're like, okay, unless you shift your center of mass closer to your feet as you go through the rack chin by essentially groin thrusting forwards, which is not how you do a rack chin, it's not going to drop off unless you launch yourself, because the speed you lift at could change those things. But that's not what this person was getting at. And so I did the maths and that was fine. And then I also went into the gym the next day and got some scales out and put my feet on it and went, all right, let's move it around. Let's see if I do that rack chin, does it increase how much is missed? No, it doesn't. If I move my center of mass closer to my feet, can I see the weight increase in the scale on my foot? Yes, I can. If I move it back, does it decrease? Yes, it does. Okay, cool. These things describe reality, and some confidence, some familiarity at least with them, I think just ingrains that further. It gives you an appreciation for the world around you and for how cool it is to be able to describe those things and be like, haha. If doing RTS and doing Integra makes you feel like you can start to see the matrix, going through this extra layer just adds to that, where you're like, sweet, I could definitely, I can understand this. This is awesome. I can listen to a podcast that Elon Musk was on and I sort of vaguely understood what he was talking about with the conservation of angular momentum. Okay, cool. But for the most part, it's just security in what you're doing and the depth of understanding that means, yeah, I'm quite happy. I'll take on anyone you want to bring in front of me from the exercise world if they want to try and challenge me on a couple of those physics bits. I'm like, no, you're wrong. If you want to disagree with me on that, you're flat wrong. I can demonstrate you're wrong mathematically and empirically. Where do you want to go from there? That's the great thing with this shit, is it's not up for debate. There are lots of facets of the world that are up for debate. Psychology and sociology and most of the ologies, other than biology, are kind of much more up for debate. They're less specifically hard science. There's more room for interpretation. But with mechanics stuff, these are raw numbers. The numbers aren't lying. They're not pretending. They reflect reality. They're therefore not up for debate. Cool. And for me, it's always been that. I just want to know the answer. I wanted to know what reality really was. I want to know the answers to that. I don't want to believe something that's wrong. So if you can show me where I've gone wrong in these equations, or if they fail to describe what's going on when I test them, then cool, what the fuck have I missed? There's an opportunity to learn or something within that. But it's that repeated exposure to these things, and they keep being proven correct, that gives you supreme confidence in what you're doing. And that, well, confidence is probably the heart of being good at a lot of things. And that comes from repeated success. And so for me, this was just like, oh yeah, let's definitely do that. So something like that.
Awesome. And it's funny, anyone who's ever done rack chins, I want to know first of all, how is that guy doing rack chins, or gal, whoever it was, because there's nothing easier about those at the top of the movement at all.
No, I know. Yeah. I know. I was like, this. even if you didn't know anything about this kind of stuff, you'd be like, where have you got that idea from? Like, just from experience, you're like, no, it's harder up here.
Sorry, I really don't understand how you think that could be the case. But then I think,
I watched the video of him of doing them as well, and I was like, you're not even doing them in a way that would make them feel easier. Where have you got this idea from? It's not like he's launching himself up, barely stopping there and dropping kind of back down, where you'd be like, okay, you've got this big force generation down here. That decreases the force you're having to produce at each point after that stage, because you're now traveling upwards. Your body has a certain momentum moving upwards. And the inertia of that is resistant to gravity slowing it down. So it's going to take some time for gravity to slow you down after you've launched yourself up in the air. And so, yeah, you might, when you get to the top, not have to deal with as much force if you launched yourself up there and didn't hold and didn't control for that kind of shit, which is, by the way, why we mentioned earlier that you should control for speed and you're doing research kind of things, because it'll fundamentally change what you're lifting with. But he wasn't doing any of that. So I was like, how have you got this idea?
How did you arrive at such a conclusion where your experience of this is very different to mine?
Yeah. And I tried watching it being like, am I missing something? You know, and I kind of even went in, like, I didn't know that it definitely wasn't when I first looked at it. I looked at it and was like, I don't think it does. And so then I sat down and I did the equations for it and went, no, it doesn't. And then I went into the gym the next day and tested it out with some scales and stuff and went, no, it doesn't. And so each part of those layers of like my own experience of a rack chin, it doesn't feel like it gets easier. It feels like it gets harder. Just my understanding of it from like looking at it was like, I don't think it does. Then doing the thing and then it being borne out in like a little experiment with it, you're like, yeah, where have you got this from?
Yeah, I think that's where this stuff probably, like, big takeaway I would take from that question is that it just allows you, especially if you've been doing this a long time, just to be able to, one, have a greater degree of accuracy, which is pretty useful in many occasions, and two, just deepens your levels of understanding of a topic that, especially if you're going to say, like, I know about this stuff, then it's probably
Yeah.
out there that you should dive into. It's funny you mentioned about, like, physics was my only science I did in high school. I got an A for it. It was the best subject I did. It was a fairly strong point. Anyone that cares to know,
You'd have a great time with doing this.
Accounting and finance was my degree. So again, a lot of numbers.
Oh, you'd be fucking great at doing this.
So I actually quite enjoy maths, would you believe? It's a terrible thing to admit. I actually enjoy equations. So I'll have to maybe get on a call with you and geek out on this stuff. Interesting indeed. So let's dive into the quick fire round. And this is just a nice chance for the audience to know a wee bit more about you as a person, your preferences, your likes, your quirks, and there's plenty of quirks, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we'll start it off, sweet or savory?
Sweet, all day.
Good man, good man. Interesting fact people won't know about you.
I've been naked on stage for more times than you care to count.
Are we talking bodybuilding?
Nope. No, playtime. Yeah, I've been naked on stage.
Okay.
Yeah, playtime. I was paid good money. No, it was I spent 2 different plays I've done where I've had to be naked on stage. One of which for several months, and then kind of moved to the West End and had to be naked on there for a bit longer. That will also motivate you to stay in reasonable nick, as it turns out. So that most people probably don't know that. So there you go. You can think of that as you will.
Makes sense, and graphic visuals indeed. So, favorite exercise currently?
Ooh. Whoa. Prone incline single arm lat pull down.
Nice.
Or like lat row, you call it kind of whatever you like.
Yeah, I do enjoy those as well. They are a favorite. Very talented. Very
talented. That's a tough question. I was like, ooh. Felt like I was letting other exercises down. You know, when you like my brain started going through, like, I do like a cuffed lat raise, and I do like that restrained tricep push down, and I do like a 45-degree hip extension. It's just like, which is a really sad state of affairs when you're like, I care deeply about which exercise child I pick ahead of all the others.
Right. So just to make exercises even feel worse, what exercise do you loathe or hate doing?
I loathe.
Or have done in the past. Like, say if you were to look back to your past and things maybe you don't do anymore, but you have done it, you look back and think,
yeah,
did that.
Like back squats. I'm definitely not built for back squatting. I don't massively love bench pressing. Quite like a deadlift. I'm relatively well suited to a deadlift, but squats and benches can piss off. Burpees can do one. Like, I've no interest in doing it. Anything on a Bosu ball, and I can't juggle. So any of those will work.
Fair enough, fair enough. My wife's laughing in the background here. So when ordering coffee, what do you order?
So when not dieting, a skinny latte. When dieting, a white Americano.
There you go.
I'm pretty boring with my coffee. I've got like, you know, those people stand there like, I'll have a skinny oat soy lappuccino with frothy. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I'm not that person. I'm like, I'm pretty plain and boring with my coffee.
Yeah, we're absolute coffee snobs. So for us, it's like we're always like, well, what about the beans? Where are they from? We've got so much home stuff. Like we've got like a Chemex at home. We've got our own really nice grinder. We've got the V60. You get it.
You've turned into those people. Coffee is one of those weird ones where people turn into that. Coffee has become the domain of the hipster. And I'm not sure at what point this happened. Coffee and pale ale. Like ales have also become, like, this one's known as the platypus is back. And it like, they just come up with really, and I've no explanation for like why certain things become like that domain. Like, I don't think anyone's done the same thing with tea at the moment, but it could have been tea. Why do people not give two shits where the tea leaves come from? And like the fact it was this tea was eaten and shat through the arse of a cat. Like, no one's paying good money for cat tea, but cat coffee, I forget that. What's the cat coffee thing called?
Not cat, it's civet coffee.
See, he fucking knows, right? This is, you know, it kind of makes me laugh that coffee has become that thing. But yeah, I have plenty of friends the same as you do who super nerd out on their coffee. I'm just sadly not one of them.
Yeah,
and then I feel like I'm letting everyone down. I feel like I feel like it seems sophisticated. So I feel like I'm less of a well-cultured man for not being able to do it.
I'm sure you make up for it in other ways, like performing naked on stage. And
that's it. Why did you get naked on stage? Well, I didn't like coffee, and so it seemed like a compensation.
Good justification, I think. So if you were stuck on a desert island and you could only take 3 items, what would they be?
A guitar. Ooh. Now, is there electricity on this island?
I'm going to say no.
So I can't take like a PlayStation because that would be super useful. Or can I have an infinite battery iPad?
The thing is, people, I knew you would ask questions. A lot of people don't ask questions like, well, can I have this, can I have that? They just go, oh, there's not going to be electricity. There's not going to be X, Y, and Z. No, you can take whatever you like, imagined or not.
In that case, I should probably take Elon Musk. I feel like that guy could make me some shit and we'd get the most out. In fact, I'll take Elon Musk, a guitar, and Margot Robbie, and I'll be fine on this island. Although there is a downside. There is a downside that Margot Robbie will leave me for Elon Musk, and I couldn't really blame her because he'll be being way more productive than me on the island. So this could also be a tragic tale.
That escalated fast. That really did. Books you're currently reading?
I am reading a Mark Manson book. I am reading Descartes' Error, which is a book on brain injury and science by a guy called Damasio. I have got over there, I've got Jordan Peterson's latest book, and I'm reading The Brothers Karamazov, which is a Dostoevsky book. I tend to read quite a few things at the same time, which makes me sound douchey. But I tend to try and like read one fiction-y thing, and then I can usually do a couple of non-fiction things at the same time, depending on topic and if I feel like reading more at that particular time in life or not. Yeah,
I have to say, I'm one of those people that goes through a phase where I enjoy reading and then I just literally go off it for a long period of time. But I really liked Luke's recommendation the other day of doing the whole 10 pages of 3 different books a day.
Yeah, that's a nice one. Yeah, but I tend to do a similar thing.
That makes me
I'm also
really achievable.
Yeah, I'm also reading a book. Actually, there's a good book called Fashionable Nonsense, which was written in the 90s by 2 guys, a guy called Alain Sokal and Jean Brimont, who are 2 French dudes, who back in the 90s, they're both physicists, realized that postmodernism was coming along and making a whole bunch of weird claims that they didn't like. So they got an essay published in a journal and given plenty of like awards that was utter horseshit and nonsense, where they were just like, they just kept using quantum mechanics to like try and describe sociology and a whole bunch of silly things. So they got this, and then it turned out to be a hoax, and then people kicked off about it, and then they wrote a book, and it's just ridiculing like how often people misuse physics terms in sociology, psychology. There's this postmodern bent, so it's just a book ridiculing and pointing out a whole bunch of those things where like, this paragraph makes no sense. They've included Gödel's theorem and related it to why men behave in this particular thing. It's like, that has nothing to do with anything. It's quite a funny book, but that was written in the 90s. And considering how much postmodernism influences lots of things currently, it's quite prescient of them to shit on it in the 90s. Yeah,
I'm gonna have to get a hold of that. It sounds like a very interesting book.
Yeah, that's good.
What is the meaning of life?
Fuck, man. Well, then you just sound like a douchey person who's decided to philosophize about the entirety of existence. I don't know what the meaning of life is. I could speculate. I think for me, I've definitely been influenced by my own mental health journey and people like Viktor Frankl and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and co. in finding meaning within suffering to some degree, and that one of the inescapable parts of life is pain and suffering. And if you can't find meaning during times of pain and suffering, then you can't find meaning at any time that really matters. And so finding a reason to live for, regardless of whether you're in pain or rather happy or anything else that happens to come along for the ride, is important. And I think that's probably best done through surrounding yourself with people that you love and care about, and doing things for them, and finding things you're passionate about and you care about and doing them, and trying to remember to just smile and laugh and do things that put a smile on your face and make you laugh, and do things that are hard for you, and some combination of all of those fucking things and some other shit, and who knows, because I'm not you and I don't know. But it's I suppose it's something like that. That was a lot of waffle. That's a tough question.
We'll take it. It's the most entertaining answer to that question that we've had, so we'll take it. I remember one of the answers that I literally never expected was, I think something you mentioned earlier, was when I had Cassim Hansen on, and it was just literally straight to the point. It was like procreation. To me, procreation, I was just like, that is so expected, so expected. That was one of my favorite answers, because it was just so deadpan, procreation. I was like,
well, the problem he's got with that answer is, what if you are infertile? Then what is the meaning of your life?
You are no use to the furthering of the human
apparently. Which is what that suggests, but then that leads down a very ethically dark path very quickly, where you're like, I guess we have to kill all the infertile people, or the moment you hit menopause, ladies, I'm afraid it's the curtains. Like, where's it if that was the sole meaning of life? Or even if even if the meaning of life was procreation, there's a role for an extended family in the continuation of a genetic line. So that's possibly why we have grandparents and things who play more of a role in the upbringing of our children and generations than we see in most of the animal kingdom. So you could maybe get out of it that way, but I've gone off on another tangent.
We couldn't even have a reference to that being nuanced as well. So there you go. What's next for Paul Standell?
In life. So one of the things I mean, it's probably more of the same, to be honest, other than, get out of lockdown and be able to go and do some more things with the other parts of my life. But yeah, a continuation of the exploration of physics as it relates to fitness. That's an area I'm keen to play with more and to talk about more, and to sort of get out there a bit more, because I think it has a level of value that isn't currently being serviced all that well. So probably related to those things as much as anything. And then, continuing to coach, continuing to spend time with people who push me, challenge me, progress me, and then also continuing to ridicule as many things as I can to put a smile on my own face as much as other people's. It's something like that.
Really, I think, like you said, bringing something like a course on that stuff, and especially because you're quite passionate about it, I can't see anyone else that I know in the industry who would speak on that side of things that passionately. So I think it would be a disservice to the industry for you not to bring that type of course. So when you do create that and release it, we'll need to get you back on.
Sounds like a plan. No pressure then. Best get fucking writing after this.
Best get on it. Put in your business plan. Last but not least, who should we have next on the podcast?
Ooh, fuck. Who have you had on?
I gave you a very small short list.
Go for it.
we've had Luke, we've had Cal. I'm due to get James on. We've had Cassim Hansen, we've had Michael, of course. We've had probably a bunch of other people that you might not know as well. That are kind of from other parts of the industry, like strength conditioning and stuff like that.
I'll tell you actually who's probably not a bad idea. Do you know Greg Slater?
Ah, yeah, the lift the bar, is it?
Yeah. Greg puts out a bunch of good stuff. He's also been through the RTS things, and spends a lot of, well, he's the head of education for Lift the Bar, so spends a lot of time educating coaches, and probably actually has quite a lot of insight to where newer people to this are coming from, the kind of questions they have and what they're kind of interested in. And Greg is great at analogies. The man seems to churn out analogy after analogy, metaphor after metaphor that works quite nicely for stuff. So yeah, Greg's probably a decent shout for you.
Very cool. Would you be able to do the connection if you know him well enough?
I'm sure I can.
Yeah, it's funny because I came across him in when I was doing MNU. He was in the lab a lot, so I'm sure I can reach out myself, but it's always nice to come from someone already.
Yeah, I'll ping him a message just after this. Be like, and then he'll tell me to piss off, and I'll say sorry, Ross. But no, he definitely won't. He'll be fine.
Awesome. Yeah, that's actually a really good shout. Like you say, anyone who's been involved in education for a long period of time always has a ton of insight. So yeah, that's a brilliant shout. Last but not least, where is the best place for people to find you and come and interact with you and do algebra with you?
So Body by Control on Instagram is the place where I hang out kind of the most. You'll see me on there. So DM me on there if you have any questions or follow-up stuff to any of this jazz. That's pretty much the main place. Otherwise, it's the website, so bodybycontrol.com. That's actually being redone kind of currently, but you can see some more of the stuff I put out, client work, kind of things within there. And then if you wanted to email, would be the other place to get in touch with me, which is paul@bodybycontrol.com. But yeah, website, Instagram, or email, those would be the three places to find me. Bug me with questions. I enjoy questions and interaction, so that would be the one.
Awesome. Well, listen, Paul, thanks again for giving up so much of your time. It's been a very fun chat.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me on.